First Peter chapter 5, as we continue our short 3-week series, we started last week on shared leadership. So this is our series on elders. Last week we talked about shared leadership, why a plurality of pastors, where we see that in the Bible. And then we ended last Sunday with presenting to you our first two elder candidates, Don and Keith. Now, as we continue this series over these next several weeks, it ends next week, and then actually, my pastor from South Carolina, Pastor Bill, he's going to be with us in 2 weeks, and he's going to bring a message on elder leadership as well as we affirm our first elders. But during that time, over these next few weeks, we want you to consider Don and Keith and their lives and their character and them as men, and hold them up against to what the Word of God says as you observe them. But this week, we're going to shift from shared leadership, and we're going to continue into kind of the role of pastors and elders. Now, there are a few topics that when you bring up, people just cringe a little bit. Like, I'm sure we've all heard, whether you go to dinner, whatever it is, some sort of function around people, it's polite to not talk about politics and religion, right? Don't bring up politics and religion. Why? Because those can be divisive and passionate issues, which I understand, like, why not bringing those up in those types of environments. But at the same time, one of the things that has happened is in telling everybody not to talk about politics and religion is nobody learned how to talk about them civilly. Like, nobody can just have a common disagreement with somebody on politics and religion and do so in a way that it doesn't just fall into anarchy. Because now you try bringing up politics and religion and talk about anybody. You see the fruits of that today, to where anything that has any sort of divisiveness to it is just automatically hostile rhetoric, right? It's so hard to have those conversations today. And if you are having those conversations, don't do it on Facebook. I've never seen anybody change their mind because you argue with them on Facebook. It's not going to happen. Just stop it, all right? Even within the church, there are topics that you can bring up that are not popular or they're kind of cringeworthy, right? Like when we talk about the exclusivity of the gospel. Now, within these four walls, you can be like, that's not uncomfortable at all. Like, this is a safe place. We all got up, we got dressed, we made a decision to be here. If you're a kid and you didn't make that decision, your parents made a decision for you to be here. But either way, you're in church on a Sunday morning, you're like, this is a safe place to talk about the exclusivity of the gospel. But if you were in a context, or you were on a mission trip, or maybe you brought a friend with you who does not follow Jesus, who doesn't believe in the Christian faith, maybe they even have a very sincere and a genuine faith, but it's a false faith, then when you start talking about the exclusivity of the gospel, then things can be really uncomfortable, especially if that person is close to you. What about sex? Like when we start talking about gender identity and sexuality and God's design for the family, everybody kind of little tingle go down your spine on that one. That's a very relevant and contentious issue now, right? I think the reason for that is because what we have, even within the church, I think we are so more secular than we think we are. Like, I'm more secular than I think I am, because we've been so influenced by society to where we have actually come to believe, and most people have come to believe, that your sexuality and your gender identity is no longer something about you, but it is who you are. To where God says your primary identity is that you are a son or you are a daughter. You are a child of God. But culture says your primary identity is sex. And so when we start talking about God's design for sexuality and gender and the family, when people assume that identity as their primary identity, and we say God's design for that is different, now they're personally attacked. So that can be a very tough topic, or a very cringeworthy topic to talk about and address. What about money? We love to talk about money in church, right? That's all we want. We just want your money, right? Like, that's a tough topic to talk about. But another topic within church that isn't talked about as often, but can be just as uncomfortable for a lot of people, is authority of pastors or authority of elders within a local church. Most people don't like authority, right? Like, you don't love having authority over, you don't love having people telling you what to do. In 2 days, we are celebrating breaking away from authority. This is our Independence Day in 2 days. We are lighting explosives and letting them burst in the sky because we don't like authority. We broke away. This is our independence. We are free. And as American people, not only is our country free from Britain, thank you, but we've kind of assumed that identity as individuals, that we value our freedom. We value our autonomy. We don't like authority. We don't like people telling us what to do. So when we talk about authority, especially in the church, I'm going to be honest, it is hard to talk about from the platform. It's hard to talk about from up here because it has to be presented in a way that it can't be viewed as self-serving. It can't be viewed as if I'm trying to convince you of something. So we're going to teach on authority the same thing, or the same way that we teach on everything else here. And the best way to teach on something is to do so in the way that the Bible teaches on it. So we're going to come at you straight from the word on this. But what is pastoral authority? What does it mean for pastors and elders to have oversight of the church? Now, growing up, I didn't have elders in my church. The first church I worked at, we didn't have elders. The second church I worked at, we didn't have elders. Like, this is not something that I grew up with or that I was familiar with. I'd heard of elders, but that was something that, like, Presbyterians, that was kind of weird. They did it. The Lutherans, they had elders. That was weird. I know people would come knock on my door. They were like Mormons, and their names were like Elder John. I'm like, what? Like, I just don't get it. I remember watching this movie about Amish people one time, and they had elders. I'm like, elders? That's weird, right? Like, it's just, I don't understand. Yeah, it's in the Bible, but it's just not something we do, right? I didn't grow up with it. It's not a common thing. It's kind of strange. So we're just not going to do it. Elders, in those other denominations that had it, it was just, they have all the power and they rule with an iron fist. Like, I'm the elder, we make this decision, this is how it goes. And they don't value congregational rule or input, right? That was my view of elders. Either that or it's just old people, right? Because, I mean, that's what elders stand for. What's an elder? It's an old person, right? So to be a leader in the church, you got to be old, right? It makes sense to me. When I was like 8 and I heard it for the first time, like, sure, why not? What's interesting is elders is used in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. However, in the Old Testament, that word elder is used in two ways. One, it is referring to an elderly person, so somebody of advanced age, but it also refers to somebody who is a respected community leader. Here's the interesting thing. Even in the Old Testament, elder, 2/3 of the time it's used to refer to a respected community leader, not an older person. Not only that, but almost exclusively when it is used, it's always used in the context of a plurality, because elders, they led in a group, they led in a plurality, so it's no elder led alone. It's always used within a group of the context that they led in. And that's the same thing that we see in the New Testament. Elders worked together, they shared leadership, they pastored the church together. Now, every elder has a different and distinct gift that they use to help lead the church and to pastor the church, but they still do so in a way that they lead together. In October of 2019, this was just a few months after Amy and I in Easton had moved to South Carolina to be a part of Cornerstone Baptist Church, where we went to that church to be trained to plant a church and then to be sent. So I tell people we went to Cornerstone to be sent from Cornerstone. That was our whole purpose in going there. And when we went to Cornerstone, the purpose of going there was to be sent to plant a church in Pittsburgh. From Cincinnati, why would we plant a church in Pittsburgh? Only Jesus, right? Like, nobody's willingly choosing to go there. But you know what? We felt like God was calling us there. We love the gospel. We love Jesus. Sure, we'll go tell those sinners in Pittsburgh that they need Jesus, right? And so that was our trajectory. That was what our plan was. A few months after being there, we got there in July. A few months after being there in October, I got called into a meeting with Pastor Bill, and he and I were talking. And at this time, Amy and I had already been talking for a few weeks. We just felt this uneasiness about going to Pittsburgh. Couldn't really explain it, just like, bleh, you know? Like, when we think about Pittsburgh, it was like, sure, we'll go. Not super excited about it now, though. And it might have been some uneasiness. I think most of it was probably just homesickness, or like, we don't know anybody there. We'll go, but like, we just don't know it. So we're like, maybe we can go back to Cincinnati and plant a church. And so we took that to Pastor Bill, and he said, no. I was like, excuse me? I said, I am a man. I'm 30. Like, you can't tell me no. Like, I was like, I don't know how to take this. What do you mean no? And he was saying, he said, like, we as elders of the, like, we don't affirm that decision. You came here to go to Pittsburgh. That was the plan of you bringing here. We were going to send you to Pittsburgh. We still think that's what God has for you. And no. He said, you can go back to Cincinnati. He said, we'll do everything we can to connect you with a church there, to support you there, but that's not something that we as a church are going to affirm and be a part of. I didn't know how to take that. This is the first time in my life that I've dealt with like pastoral authority, oversight, somebody taking his role and leading in a way that he had to tell somebody no. And I wasn't sure what to do. I thought I had that freedom to be like, you know what, I want to go back to Cincinnati. He'd be like, okay, sure. But he said no. Like, I just don't think that is what God has for you. And what he was doing in that time was he was exercising his pastoral authority over how he was going to lead his church and what they were going to participate in, and prayerfully kind of discern what he think God had for the people underneath him in that. I was on staff, and so I was underneath his authority. Now, fast forward 18 months, some things with Pittsburgh just didn't work out. Things weren't coming together. Like, we tried hard. The harder we tried to get to Pittsburgh, it was just like it kept getting further away. No doors were opening. Nothing was coming together. It was just like we were trying to fit in something that God was not trying to happen. So approached Pastor Bill again. I was like, hey, we've been praying a lot. We don't think it's Pittsburgh. And he said, you know what? He said, after you being here for as long as you've been here, he said, I wholeheartedly agree. He said, the elders and I agree, you need to plant a church in Pittsburgh, or you need to plant a church in Cincinnati. We're going to send you to Cincinnati. We're going to support you. We're all in, plant in Cincinnati. So it wasn't a no, but it took that time of development to get to a point to where like they affirmed that decision, because you can understand the hesitation on their part that we came to plant a church in Pittsburgh. However, we didn't go because maybe some homesickness, which is probably mostly what it was. And their concern is you're just trying to run back to what is comfortable. If you're just trying to run back to what is comfortable and you're not really willing to risk everything for the gospel, you're not willing to put it all on the line to plant a church, then why should we support you in that? And so we had to go through that process of being like, okay, we will leave home behind. And we really had. Like, we put Cincinnati, put it away. Funny story about that. My mom, they're actually here today. My parents here, and they called, I don't know, maybe about 6 months, about a year into our time in South Carolina. She's like, hey, we're thinking about moving to Kentucky, moving to Russell Springs, where all the family is. A bunch of my family is there, like family's close, cousins, grandparents, brother was living there at the time. So all the family was there. They're like, we just want to make sure before we move, like, you're not coming back to Cincinnati. I said, Mom, go to Pittsburgh, or go. We're going to Pittsburgh. We're not coming back to Cincinnati. 6 months later, called her and was like, hey, I have some news. I didn't even have to say anything. She just said, you're moving back home, aren't you? It's like, we are. But we had to go through that. And that was my first time dealing with like elder leadership, pastoral authority over men kind of in this spiritual leadership position that God had placed them, because he placed me in their church, for them to tell me no. And we had to think about, like, how do we take that? Of course we didn't like it. Why? Because nobody likes authority. Nobody likes being told no. But Amy and I, we took that, we received that. We didn't just bolt and try to get connected to another church in Cincinnati. We were like, you know what? We believe that these men have our best interest in mind. And so, like, humbly, we're just gonna stay. We're going to submit to them. We're going to pray. We're going to walk through this. And if God wants us to go to Pittsburgh, we'll go to Pittsburgh. Now, I tell you that story to tell this. That, like I said, that was my first experience, relationship with elder leadership and pastoral authority. But what that does is that kind of illustrates the relationship between church leaders and church members. So the elders have some authority within the context of the local church, and church members should at least consider like the authority or the role of pastors and elders in that church. for a few reasons. One, so you can know if they are exercising it well or if they're overstepping, and how you relate to them. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Austin, you're just going to spend all morning up there just telling us why we should listen to you, why we should listen to your authority. That's not what this is about. I promise I'm going to make this as relevant and applicable as possible, because this is applicable, this is relevant, and this is vitally important in the life of a church, because church leadership sets the foundation for a healthy church culture. And that's what we want to do here, especially in the life of a new church when we are still building. So here's why you should care about this. One, if you are a man who desires to be an elder or a pastor, you'll know what is expected of you. You'll know what the role is, what the function is, what it means to be an elder or a pastor. Now, I'm going to use elder and pastor interchangeably because it's the same thing. And for everybody else, you should care about this because you will know what to expect from your leadership. You'll know to hold them up against God's word to know if they are leading well, if they are exercising their authority properly, if they're neglecting their role, or if they are leading in a way that is unbiblical. So in 1 Peter chapter 5, Peter here, he's writing to the church, and what he does in chapter 5 is he is directly addressing the elders at this point. He's addressing the elders, and he addresses those who aspire to be elders or those who aspire to be pastors. And if I could take these few verses that we're going to go over today, we're just going to go through verses 1 through 4 today in chapter 5. If I could take these 4 verses and sum them up into one thing, this is what Peter's saying. He's saying, humble yourselves and lead as servants. That is what he's saying in these 4 verses. Humble yourselves and lead as servants, starting in verse 1. So I exhort the elders among you, as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you. So first, Peter here, he is primarily addressing how they should lead in their capacity and use their authority. So you can absolutely see how this is relevant. You don't have to search very hard to see how leadership has been neglected or abused, even leadership within the church. How people abuse their leadership, how they overstep their leadership, how they neglect their leadership. You don't have to search hard inside or outside of the church to find those examples. However, when authority is abused or neglected, every single time, it is because that leader is leading in a way that is unbiblical. What God does in his word is he tells those in positions of authority, in positions of leadership, especially pastors, how to lead. God makes it very clear what he expects from the leadership within his church and how he expects a church to be led. The local church is given pastors, biblically qualified men that we're going to talk about the qualifications next week. And there are 4 main functions or roles that I think we can pull from this in 1 Peter chapter 5. 1 Peter chapter 5, again in verse 2, shepherd the flock of God that is among you. So first, God gives the local church pastors to shepherd the church. So to shepherd the church. Now, nobody here is probably a farmer. Nobody here has probably shepherded. I think that's how you say it, shepherded real sheep. I've been to a petting zoo, so I've seen a sheep before, but I've never been a shepherd, right? I've never shepherded real sheep. A funny story about that, one of my best friends, he was at a pastoral interview, and one of the persons, the members of the church, when they were kind of just had this open forum of ask the question for our pastor candidate, somebody stood up and asked him, have you ever been a shepherd before? He's like, well, I'm a student pastor at a church. No. Have you ever been a real shepherd before? Have you ever shepherded sheep? He said, no, I haven't. He said, well, I don't think anybody can be a pastor if they were never a shepherd. It's like, well, okay, what do I say about that, right? So if you hold that qualification and that's your requirement for a pastor, I'm sorry, I don't meet that one. Good luck finding one. So hard to find these days. Real shepherds. But pastor, shepherd, I'm going to use that interchangeably as well. because these are terms that are used interchangeably with elder and overseer as pastor shepherd. In Ephesians 4:11, Paul wrote this. He said, and he gave the apostles and the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers. So real quick on these words. The word for pastor and shepherd, do you know how many times somebody is actually referred to as a pastor or shepherd, a leader of a local church with the word pastor in the New Testament? One time. That's it. One time are people referred to as pastors. However, the verb form of shepherding is used quite often. Paul favored the word elders and overseers, whereas elder was more of a description of somebody's character, and overseer was more of a description of their function, their role, their responsibilities were. And so these words are used interchangeably, and the reason why we get pastor, shepherd, these words are words that we use all the time, because that's the vision that the Bible gives us. That's the clarity. So even though the term in the noun form of pastor is only used once, the verb form of shepherding and to shepherd, that's all over the New Testament. And this is a significant analogy, because a shepherd was not a sought after career. Shepherd was a dirty career. You weren't going to get glory. You weren't going to get honor. You weren't going to get rich. People didn't want to be a shepherd. It'd be like today, wanting to be a farmer. Like, it's an honest job. It is a necessary job. Some people love it. I'm sure some shepherds loved their job. It's really hard work. You're not going to get rich doing it. It's not going to bring a whole lot of honor. It's not going to bring a whole lot of glory, and it has a way of keeping you humble. So being a pastor, being a shepherd, being an elder, it isn't something that should give you a big head. It's not anything that should fill your ego, because what it is primarily a leading by serving role. It is a role where you are called to servanthood. It's a shepherding role. It's something that should fill pastors with humility, because it is only a role that's been entrusted to them. Here's something really interesting about the shepherds we see in the Bible. Almost every single shepherd we see in the Bible, none of them are shepherding their own sheep. Have you ever thought about this? They are all shepherding sheep owned by somebody else. They are given stewardship over the sheep that they are caring for. This isn't my church. This isn't the elders' church. No church belongs to the pastor. This is Jesus' church. And we only have stewardship over what he has entrusted us with, and we will be held accountable for how we treated the sheep. That is what it means to be a shepherd. It's a humbling role, it's a necessary role, but it's a servant role. Church leaders are not cowboys who drive cattle. We're not just walking around trying to get things done. Rather, they are shepherds whose main role is to preserve, to protect, to serve, to tend to the sheep, to care for their wounds. So what that means is that an elder or pastor, their primary role is not to build and lead a great organization. It is to care for the people's souls underneath their care. That is what a shepherd is. I know this guy who went on a mission trip to Istanbul, Turkey. So he went on this trip. This is a true story, by the way. You're going to think I'm making this up. This is not made up. This is true, I promise you. He went on a mission trip to Istanbul, and as he was there was one of the greatest sheep tragedies that anyone had experienced. The shepherds, real shepherds, not shepherd analogy, I mean real shepherd now. So you go to Istanbul, it's different. You can find real shepherds over there. Harrison, Ohio, not so much. Istanbul, Turkey, all over the place, all right? So they were in Istanbul, Turkey, and as he was there, these shepherds were eating breakfast and kind of neglected the flock a little bit. Now, if you know something about sheep, sheep aren't the smartest animal. I know sometimes when we talk about being sheep in the Bible, we use it as like it's kind of like a term of endearment and affection, because the pictures that we colored when kids, Jesus is cuddling sheep. Like, it's awesome to be a sheep. Sheeps aren't smart. They just do what they're told. That's why they need a shepherd, right? That's why we need a shepherd. So the shepherds kind of neglected the sheep as they were eating breakfast. I don't know why in my mind I just see them like sitting around a table like eating Frosted Flakes or something. That's just like they're just kind of zoned out with their bowls of cereal. And I'm sure in Istanbul they're absolutely not eating bowls of cereal with Frosted Flakes, but they could be. We don't know. I don't know. I wasn't there. But they neglected their flock, and one sheep just kind of veers off. Walks away from the rest. And so what do the rest of the sheep do? They're like, oh, we're going to follow that one now. And so they all start to follow the sheep. What does that sheep do? Boop, off of a ravine. Jumps right off of a cliff. What do all the other sheep do? They're like, oh, I guess we're following him. Boop, boop, boop. Do you know how many sheep jumped off that cliff? 1,500. Hold on, there's a silver lining, all right? The first 400 sheep that jumped off this cliff, they all died. The next 1,100, they landed on a giant pillow of wool, and they survived. And so then these shepherds go running out, look over this ravine. There's 1,100 sheep stuck, and so then they just start pulling them out to realize that the 400 underneath are dead, but they sacrificed themselves for the other dummies who were going to jump on top of them, right? This is a true story. What does that show us? What does that show us about this? This demonstrates something. This is why Jesus referred to himself as the Good Shepherd. He knew something that was very, very true about the human heart. He knew something that when sheep follow, they just do what they see what other sheep do. We look at the person next to us, we do what that person does. You look at what your dad did, and you do what he did, and he did what he did, and he did what he did. You look at your mom and do what she did, and do what she did, and do what her mom did, right? We just look at people around, and we model them. Now, people who don't know Jesus, unbelievers, they are not intentionally going out seeking self-destruction. But what they are hoping is that the person that they are following will ultimately lead them to fulfill the desires of their heart. They're looking to follow somebody who will give them what they want. And this is why God gives us shepherds. And this is why shepherds cannot neglect their role. But here's the truth. All shepherds mess up. All shepherds make mistakes. All shepherds that you're going to follow on this earth, they are all going to mess up somehow, except for one. There was one good shepherd. There was one perfect shepherd. And in John 10:11, Jesus said this. He said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And then in 15:13, he said, greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. The perfect shepherd perfectly led and perfectly shepherded his sheep well, so much that he laid his life down for them. He laid his life down for the good of his sheep. He gave his life for the benefit of all of us. This is why Peter in 1 Peter 5 calls him the chief shepherd, and in 2 Peter calls him the overseer and the shepherd of our souls. So God gives shepherds to lead the local church, and pastors aren't without shepherds. I have a pastor, and this is the reason that we go to a shared pastor in a pastoral leadership role, is because it's not the responsibility of one person, but the pastors, as they work together, they pastor and they shepherd one another. So he gives us shepherds in the local church, but also God gives the local church pastors to lead the local church. Look again in verse 2 of chapter 5 and 1 Peter, shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight. So that oversight means to lead, to look out for, to watch, to lead to where you need them to go. It's oversight. It's overseeing. It's not a complicated word to get, but he's called to be a leader. A pastor, a shepherd, an elder is called to be a leader, but not just a leader in the church, but to lead with a team of fellow elders. Hebrews 13:17, the writer of Hebrews wrote this, obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls, as those who will have to give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with groaning, for that would be of no advantage to you. Here's what's something interesting about this. Nowhere in the Bible are leaders told to force their congregation to submit to them. Nowhere are we told, our leaders, pastors, elders, told to coerce submission. And that's because pastoring, shepherding, being an elder, it is a servant leadership role. It is a role that somebody has and they lead by example. What does it mean to lead by example? Somebody that is a humble leader, they don't demand that people respect them, but they realize that their position is a gift, that it has ultimately been entrusted to them by God, and that the church itself is God's church, it's not theirs. They humbly lead by serving. They don't demand respect, but they live in a way that respect can and should be given. A humble leader is teachable. You ever heard the acronym FAT? Like we want fat people in this church: faithful, available, teachable. So a humble servant, a humble leader is someone that is faithful, someone that is available, and someone that is teachable. Admit they don't have all the answers, that they can learn from other people, that there are other people around that have input that they can take, and they realize the importance of working in a team and within a team framework. Also, a humble leader is a servant. You cannot be a humble leader without serving the people that you are leading. This is why Jesus said in Mark 10, he said, and Jesus called them to him, and he said to them, you know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them, but it shall not be so among you. So this isn't him just talking to leaders. This is him talking to all Jesus followers. Everyone who aspires to be like Jesus, who follows Jesus, who wants to live like Jesus in their life, this is how. Whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be a slave to all. So he's saying you want to be great, serve people. Serve people. If serving is beneath you, then leadership is beyond you. God will not call you to leadership if you are not first serving. And then a humble leader does it all for the glory of God. It's not for himself. It's not for what he can get from it, but it is all for God. And one of the ways that elders, pastors lead in this capacity is by teaching. So God gives the local church pastors to teach the church. Now, an elder is primarily a teacher, but this doesn't mean that an elder is primarily a preacher. It's not just through words, though it is through words, but it is also through example. This is, to be able to teach, this is a qualification and a function of an elder. Like I said, we're going to get into that next week. But this doesn't mean that because an elder is a teacher or able to teach, that every elder can get up on a Sunday morning and preach a message for 35, 40 minutes, whatever it is. I know a few weeks ago, you guys were like, Austin, you in 25 minutes, you should do that every week. It's not going to happen. But this doesn't mean that every elder is going to get up and preach on a Sunday morning. But what it does mean is that they have the ability to teach in context, and not only that, they have the ability to recognize what is false and to call it out. When I was at Cornerstone, as far as I can remember, as far as I know, at least the whole time I was there, and I had never heard of another elder preaching on a Sunday morning. Pastor Bill, and their church is 20 years old now, the only elder that's preached on a Sunday morning. He's the only one. But there's 6 other elders in the church, and they all teach in kids ministry, student ministry, small groups. They all teach somewhere, and they have the ability to teach, and they have the ability to recognize what is true and to recognize what is false. And not only, even though Pastor Bill's the only one that I sat under as a teacher, I learned from all of them, because in the position that I was in as a church planter, I was able to sit in elder meetings, and I was able to observe them. I was able to observe and learn how they shepherded a church together. I was able to see them pray together. I was able to see them lead together. And so I learned something from all of them without them standing up on a stage and preaching. So that's not what it means to be able to teach. What it means to be able to teach is through your life, through your leadership, you can teach what the Word of God says in a specific context, and you can call out what is false. Because the role of a teacher, it's not just important for the health of a church now, but it's important for the future health of the church. And so as a result, elders are not simply teachers, but elders are also called to equip. They must be purposefully equipping believers and the next generation of elders to someday take their spot to lead the church, and who knows, maybe plant churches, be sent out to do something else. So God gives the local church pastors to equip the church as well. to equip the church. Here's my future vision of grace. My future vision of grace is that we have discipled people so well. Like, we just get really good at discipling people, right? Like, we don't just want people to show up on a Sunday morning, but we want people in Grace getting plugged in, and we want Grace to be a place that is full of equipped, developed disciples, that we raise up leaders. We bring in people, or not we bring in people, but we raise up people to be kids leaders, kids ministry leaders, church planters, to plant churches someday, to pastor, to raise up worship leaders, to do all these people who want to be missionaries. Like, we just have this system of, and don't be scared by that word system, but we have this process in which we are so intentional about developing true, legitimate followers, disciples of Jesus, that if a church 15 minutes away says, hey, we need a children's minister, somebody else says, we need a pastor, we need somebody to fill the pulpit, we need somebody to lead worship, I want them to be like, you know what, call Grace, because they are discipling people, they have leaders, they have a very deep bench, and they are so intentional about developing people to truly follow and passionately follow Jesus. Call them and see who they have. That's going to be the sign of a healthy church, is how well do we equip, to where our focus is not what happens in these walls, but it's what we're able to do outside of them, to where we don't measure what our seating capacity is, but we measure our sending capacity. That's what I want to see. I want to be a place where we are so healthy, to where we are a church full of developed, passionate, Jesus-loving, Jesus-following disciples, that when somebody around needs something, they say, call Grace and see what they have. Because we have taken our responsibility to equip so seriously. Listen, I love my seminary education. I'm thankful for my seminary education. I truly am. I'm proud of my seminary education. But here's the thing. Here's the thing about seminary education. The task of raising up pastors, leaders, elders, children's ministry directors, youth ministry directors, youth pastors, worship pastors, whatever role it is, that is not primarily the job of seminaries and Bible colleges. That is the job of the church. And we as a church need to be intentional as leaders about developing a process to equip our people. And then as followers of Jesus, you need to be intentional about stepping into that process to be developed, to be a leader, to passionately, truly follow Jesus and exercise the gifts that he has given you. So this is what pastors, elders should do. They shepherd, they lead, they teach, they equip. But Peter also gives us some things of what they should not do. So what should pastors not do? Look, continuing in verse 2. Not under compulsion, but willingly. So what he's saying, don't pastor out of obligation. If you are obligated to pastor, you probably shouldn't be a pastor. Would anyone here want someone pastoring or shepherding them who really just doesn't want to do it? Maybe they just got nothing else to do, or they've just been, maybe they've been doing it for so long that they have no other options, even though their passion for it is gone. Like, you can be doing it for so long, and this is really all you know, but your passion is still there. That person should still be doing it, as long as that passion is still there. So Paul wrote to Timothy. He was telling Timothy that whoever desires to be a pastor, whoever desires to be an elder, they desire a good thing. You need to have a desire for it. It starts with a passion for it. This makes me think of, like, who would be doing this under compulsion? It makes me think of like the Vietnam draft, or for those of you who maybe you relate more to the movie Divergent, right? Like where you just picked, you're told which category you're going to, like, this is your job now. This is what you're going to do with the rest of your life. You're kind of conscripted into service. You're obligated to do it now, regardless whether you have a passion for it or not. That doesn't matter. This is what you're doing. This is what you're obligated to do. Now go do it. Nobody wants somebody pastoring them because they're obligated to do it. So he's saying, don't do this under compulsion. Don't do this just because you're compelled to do it, but have a passion for it. It says, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly. So eager and willing are different. Willing is doing it freely, doing it because you want to, not because you have to. Eager is doing it because it's the inner motivation of your heart. Like, this is what you desire the most to do. You are doing this willingly. You desire to care for what God cares for. You desire to lead in a way that you get to teach and equip people to be more a part of what God is doing the same. A pastor errs when he steps outside of doing it freely, willingly, and eagerly. When he does it for what Peter calls as shameful or selfish gain. And here's the thing. Pastors pastoring for shameful gain, for selfish gain, because of what they can get out of it, this is not a new problem. This is not something that at the rise of TV and media ministry, pastors were like, you know what? I can get rich off of being a pastor, so I'm going to step into this role now, right? This isn't something that just happened. Look at in Ezekiel chapter 34. Ezekiel chapter 34, this is over 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years. Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, even to the shepherds, thus says the Lord. So this is God condemning the shepherds, condemning the leaders of the people of Israel. He says, shepherds of Israel who have been feeding yourselves, should not shepherds feed the sheep? You eat the fat, you clothe yourselves with wool, you slaughter the fat ones, but you do not feed the sheep. The weak you have not strengthened. The sick you have not healed. The injured you have not bound up. The strayed you have not brought back. The lost you have not sought. And with force and harshness you have ruled them. This is God calling out the shepherds, the leaders of Israel over 2,000 years ago, saying, you are doing this because of what you can get out. Your primary concern is taking care of yourself. You're just exercising your power, your position, your authority because of what you can get out of it, and you are neglecting the flock. The benefit of the people underneath you isn't even a concern of yours. You just want to get fat and rich off of the position that you're in. And sadly, this is not exclusive to the Old Testament. Anytime in the New Testament, here's the thing, anytime in the New Testament that we see false teachers and accusations of false teachers, almost every single time you can find the underlying motivation is selfish, financial, shameful gain. You don't have to look hard to find that today either. 2 Peter, in 2 Peter 2:23, he wrote this, he said, and in their greed, they will exploit you with false words. So people are going to be motivated by false teaching, by false words, by false preaching, to get in a position of authority so that they can leverage their position to get what they can from you. And then he says, you should not do it oppressively. In verse 3, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. So saying, don't be a bully. Anybody Back to the Future? Biff Tannen, right? What about what about Johnny Lawrence? Who knows Johnny Lawrence? Where's he from? Karate Kid. Yeah, Johnny Lawrence, Karate Kid. Scut. Where's Scut from? The redheaded kid from A Christmas Story? Yeah, right. Kim, I was really expecting you to come through on that one. I'm not going to lie. Yeah, the redhead. Don't be a bully. Nobody likes a bully. God hates bullying, especially when it's coming from someone who is supposed to be a shepherd. Someone whose primary role is to protect, to tend, to care for, to love, to lead the sheep. There are too many examples of bully pulpits or churches who have leaders and people in positions of leadership that choose to lead through intimidation and coercion or by title rather than by example. Look, if you desire to be a pastor or a leader in the church because it gives you some power or some authority and you're going to act like a dictator, God does not desire for you to be in that role. He doesn't want you there. If you get to that role, it's going to be because it's outside of his will, and you have no idea what it means to lead in a church. I've never had to lead, or I've never served under a pastor like this. I've never served under a pastor that was just very that served as a dictator. I never felt the soul-crushing power of that. But I have a lot of friends who have. I've got a lot of friends who have told me nightmare stories about how their souls were just crushed by the leadership in the church. Because you can't bring up any problems to leadership, because if you bring up a problem to leadership, then you get accused of being the problem. You're trying to start some sort of issue. Something's not actually wrong. There's no problem in the church. There's nothing wrong. You're the problem in this. You need to figure this out, and you just need to stop. And then what happens is it sucks the life out of the room. And in churches like this type of leadership, it just quenches the spirit. It just stifles what God wants to do in and through that church, because now the church is no longer on God's mission, but it's whatever the authoritarian pastor wants to do, and now you have to go his way that determines the mission. And we clearly see through 1 Peter that this is not God's design for leadership. Humble yourselves and lead as servants. All pastors should be examples to the flock. Every pastor serves in leadership under the main shepherd. All pastors are under shepherds to the chief shepherd, Jesus. And it's good and it's right for people within the church to be able to look at their pastors as models, as leaders, as that example to follow. I've got those people in my life. I've got Pastor Bill. I've got my friend Aaron who pastors the church well. I've got other pastors and leaders that I've served with that I look for, that I still call sometimes. And it's good that they are those examples, but it's on the pastor to be that example. It is his responsibility to be the example worth following. But I want you to hear me very clearly on this. Your pastors are mortals. We are still human. We are still in the flesh. We will still sin. We will mess up. We will make bad decisions. We will make mistakes. I can make you one promise. If I can't make you any other promises, I think I can make you a few, but if I can't make you any other promises, if you hang around here for any period of time and you get connected, you're here for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, I promise you this, at some point, I will disappoint you. Guarantee it. I will let you down. I will mess up at something, okay? Bad decision. We're going to go in a direction that you don't want to go. Like we're going to do something. You're like, that wasn't a good, something's going to happen and you're going to disagree with the decision I make. There's going to be something I do. We will let you down. And here's what I want you to hear from me on. Don't put a pastor in the place of your heart where only Jesus deserves to be. There's only one perfect and good shepherd that is worth giving your life to and following. So if you're here today and you know Jesus, are you truly following him? Are you following the chief shepherd? I don't mean do you recognize his authority? Do you believe in him? I mean, are you actually following him as a sheep follows a shepherd? And for those of you in here that don't know Jesus, there's only one person that loves you enough, one shepherd that has ever lived that loves you enough to give his life for your benefit and your benefit alone so that you can have eternal life. That if you repent and believe and place your faith in Jesus, you will be saved because he is the good and the perfect shepherd that laid down his life for you. Let's pray. So Father, as we close out our time together, God, we thank you for the gift of